Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true. And with thanksgiving, I will be a living sanctuary, Lord, for you. Please join me for a few moments in this prayer. God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in your sight. O God, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. You have heard the reading of the scripture text, and I invite you to engage with me for a few moments on this idea, pre-approved. Every now and then, I get mail from credit card companies. It always has a familiar message on it. You've been pre-approved. These pre-approvals promise all sorts of things. A high spending limit, low interest rates, discounts on shopping, on gasoline, on airline tickets, on concerts and movies. But regardless of what they offer, the one thing they all have in common is this: they require you to be in debt. The point of a credit card is that you can purchase now and pay later. This means that whenever you use it, you now owe something. Credit card companies make their money by charging you to be in their debt. If you've ever been in credit card debt, you know how hard it is to pay it off. You also know how it feels to have a credit card in your hand, to have the power to buy what you want. It is tempting, it is seductive, and companies know this. But that power comes with responsibility. Some people have been ruined by creating debts they cannot pay. Others have been afraid to take on any risk at all. Sometimes pre-approval can be the most frightening thing ever. I wonder sometimes if that's what's on Isaiah's mind. Isaiah, young brother of Judah, Isaiah, the almost but not yet prophet. It's easy to forget that we have the benefit of Isaiah's story, but Isaiah had to live it. He had to confront the awesome power and majesty of the Most High God. And I have to wonder if Isaiah wondered, what did I do to be here? Well, before we consider where Isaiah is, it seems good to consider when Isaiah is. Verse 1 of this chapter in Isaiah begins with a seemingly offhand remark. In the year that King Uzziah died. Why would this matter? Maybe because King Uzziah is both an example and a warning. King Uzziah knew something about pre-approval. The second chapter of, or rather the second book of Chronicles and the 26th chapter says this about King Uzziah, that he became the king of Judah at the age of 16. Uzziah started off well. He did what was right in the sight of God. Uzziah listened to the instructions of the high priest. He built towers. He dug wells. He was honored and respected across nations. Uzziah was powerful. Uzziah was popular, but he also became prideful. He was not content to simply be the king. He tried to do the work of the priest too. In the year that King Uzziah died, people would have known why he died. He was stricken with leprosy. He was stricken with pride. Pride that would not allow him to put his ego aside and let the priests do the work that they had been assigned to do. Yes, Uzziah had been pre-approved to be king, but he had not done the work to be priest. This would have been on the minds of people in the year that King Uzziah died, the year that a popular and powerful man with all sorts of potential was brought down by his own pride. I imagine this is in the back of Isaiah's mind as he is confronted by the presence and power of God. I mean, was not Isaiah blessed by God? Was not Uzziah a king who had been raised up by God, who had been blessed in all of his endeavors, who had done so much work in the name of God, and yet brought down by his own hubris, brought down by his own ego? And suddenly the stakes of Isaiah's appearance before God are higher than ever before. What did I do to be here? And how do I make sure that I can stand in the presence of God? First half of our passage is simply Isaiah describing what he's experiencing, and he's overwhelmed by what he's experiencing. Isaiah is a mere mortal who is somehow in the presence of God. It's fascinating, but it's frightening at the same time. He's afraid because he feels unworthy. He feels inadequate. It seems like Isaiah has a classic case of imposter syndrome. You know about imposter syndrome. It's the feeling that you don't belong. It's the feeling that everyone is going to find out that you're a fraud. It's this misguided belief that you don't deserve your job, that you don't deserve your accomplishments, that you don't deserve any praise. There's probably at least one person in here who is wondering, how did I get here? Somebody who's pondering, why did they accept me? Someone who is questioning, am I worthy of this? I think this is a good time to remind you of the difference between humility and hubris. Some people are afraid to ever think well of themselves because they think it is hubris. Some folks believe that humility means downplaying yourself, means suppressing your gifts and talents, means making yourself lower than low so you don't offend anyone else. I'd like to tell you today that humility and hubris are not one and the same. I heard someone put it this way: humility is simply agreeing with God about who I am and what I'm capable of doing. Humility is not lying about our capabilities, our qualities. Rather, it is acknowledging that God has made me fearfully and wonderfully. That is humility. I agree with God about the work that God is doing and has done in me. And Isaiah is worried because mere mortals cannot simply look at God. They cannot simply stand or sit or be in God's presence. The writer attributes these words to God in the 33rd chapter of Exodus. No one shall see me and live. Isaiah fears for his life because imposters cannot stand in God's presence. He doesn't know what to say, what to do, what to think, but an angel comes to purify Isaiah with a burning coal from the altar. Isaiah is refined by fire and freed from his insecurities. He is acknowledged and affirmed by those with authority. And the angel speaks clearly. Your guilt is gone and your sin is erased. Isaiah did not work his way into being worthy. In other words, he is not called because he was qualified. He is qualified because he was called. This is the meaning of pre-approval. Pre-approval is God's way of reminding us, of affirming in us that we are already prepared for what needs to be done, and we do not need to fear being phonies or fakes. For the real and true God who has called us has equipped us to do what we must do. It can be hard to grasp this concept because every day, in some way, shape, or fashion, we are wrestling with the problem of human pre-approval. We have learned in some way, shape, or form since we were born that we cannot be who we are or what we are meant to be unless some other human being has acknowledged it and said, it's okay. Pre-approval says that God sees us as already acceptable. Pre-approval says that God recognizes our potential and gives us power. Pre-approval says that God has affirmed our call and administered our consecration. We are who God has called us to be. We are not waiting to become. We are not waiting to be approved. God has already claimed us and equipped us and is sending us forth. God's question to Isaiah is not, are you prepared? Are you qualified? God's question is, who will I send? Who will go? It seems to me that acknowledgement and acceptance of God's call is the only pre-approval we need. Perhaps God is not waiting on us to be ready. God is simply waiting on us to accept an invitation that is already extended. My friends, you and I are pre-approved by God. God has given us the power to transform this world. And pre-approval is not a debt that we owe. It is a seed that we sow. I've come today to remind you that pre-approval is divine work, not a human constraint. I believe many of us have been stuck in place because we are waiting for pre-approval for a thing that is already done, already completed, already signed, sealed, and delivered. Pre-approval means we can't wait for someone to acknowledge what is already underway. I wonder sometimes, what if Joseph Cinque and the travelers aboard the Amistad had waited for pre-approval to claim their freedom? They would have landed on the shores of the United States as slaves, but rather in the middle of the ocean, in the middle of the night, they decided amongst themselves, we will not be enslaved. For the God we believe in has pre-approved our humanity, has pre-approved our purpose, has already let us know that we are fearfully and wonderfully and beautifully made, and that no other human being, no other godly creation on this earth can subjugate us, can hold us down, can pull us under. Our humanity is not up for human approval. God has called the pre-approved. You've known them throughout history. It's often said that well-behaved women rarely make history. I'm thankful for the unruly folk who understood that pre-approval was already given by virtue of birth. I think today of the pre-approved folk like the Reverend Jarena Lee, who would not be ordained in the AME church at the time that she felt her call, but she knew God was calling her to preach. And in the era of chattel slavery, rode across the countryside, compelled to preach the gospel, not because it was easy, not because it was safe, but because she was called and equipped and pre-approved. I'm talking about pre-approved folk like Fannie Lou Hamer, who was often discounted by the way she talked, discounted for daring to be a big and black and nappy-headed woman, but who knew very well that her freedom was not up for debate. A woman who even by other Black activists was said to not be eloquent enough, not polished enough, not enough to show up in the halls of Congress, and yet there she sat and testified to the work of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. I'm talking pre-approved folk who dared to step outside of the lines of human constraint and to say, my freedom cannot wait. My purpose cannot be subjugated. My work has already been stamped with approval. So my friends, I ask you this question. Who will go? Who will be sent? Who among you will embrace the powerful call of God's pre-approval? Perhaps you have been wondering what's next for you. Do I stick with this job? What do I do after this degree? Do I pursue ordination? Do I go into chaplaincy? Do I go into more school? What is next? What is coming? God, what do I do? I can't tell you what God's plan is for you. What I can say is that everything God has planned for you is pre-approved. We and our humanity are not working to prove our worth and our value, regardless of what our societal norms have said. I tell you here and now, your humanity is pre-approved. You have been denied or discarded on the basis of not showing up in the right body, the right gender identity, the right sexuality, the right skin tone, the right comportment, the right professionalism, the right degrees, the right credentials. There are so many pieces of the human checklist that we may not check off. But thanks be to God, whose pre-approval came to a young man who was not yet a prophet. Thanks be to God, whose purifying fire has refined us and sharpened us and prepared us for whatever may come in this world. Everyone will not affirm your being. Everyone will not acknowledge your call. But God has already pre-approved your steps, pre-approved your path, pre-approved your movement through the world. Now, will you be sent? Will you go? That part is up to you. God bless you.